All right, so today's discussion is about yet another way to categorize arguments. It's called stasis theory. But before we jump into that, let's just quickly review the two ways of categorizing arguments that we've already discussed. The first was by purpose, the second was by occasion. So recall that the purposes of arguments include arguments to inform, to convince, to persuade, to meditate or pray, to explore, and to make decisions. Remember also that the occasion of an argument refers to the idea that arguments can be forensic, or about the past, epidictic, or about the present, or deliberative, about the future. But what we're focusing on today is a third system of categorization, and it's called stasis theory. In ancient Greece and Rome, it was a system of asking a fixed set of specific questions to help examine legal cases. The questions are, did something happen or is something happening? What is the nature of the thing? And by the thing, we're talking about the issue, the topic. So if the topic is something philosophical like love, what is the nature of love? If we're talking about something maybe having to do with politics or with government, we could ask, what is the nature of government? What's the nature of liberalism? What's the nature of conservatism? So basically, the thing at the end of these questions is a fill in the blank. The next stasis question is, what is the quality of the thing, and what is the cause of the thing? Some of you may notice that that's actually two questions, and we'll discuss that later, or if that's confusing, we can discuss that in class. The fourth stasis question is, what actions should be taken? Each stasis question is going to explore a different aspect of a problem or a topic, and it's going to use different evidence or techniques to reach conclusions. This is useful as a writer or a debater in that you can use these questions to help you explore the aspects of any topic you're considering. So next, let's take a look at how each stasis question leads to a different kind of argument. So did something happen or is something happening? Arguments that answer this question are called arguments of fact. An argument of fact usually involves a statement that can be proved or disproved with specific evidence or testimony. So for example, if the topic is pollution of the oceans, the stasis question, is it really happening or occurring? This seems pretty easy to settle. Either scientific data prove that the oceans are being polluted, or they don't. But it's sometimes not that easy to settle these matters. So people need to also ask a number of other questions about the facts. So some considerations. Where do the facts come from? Are the facts reliable? And is there any kind of problem or potential problem with the facts? Okay, the second stasis question, what is the nature of the thing? Arguments that answer this question are called arguments of definition. Okay, so these arguments are particularly powerful in that they help determine what something or someone is. So they help us define classes and categories. So they can result in inclusion or exclusion. These types of arguments help us recognize that classifications change over time and are the result of cultural, social, and political forces. So as an example, what we define as appropriate dress or stylish dress today isn't quite the same as what was considered appropriate or stylish several hundred years ago. Our political leaders, at least in the United States, nowadays, for example, don't wear wigs most of the time. Likewise, appropriate dress for females in particular has changed. So because of the ways that we are defining concepts now, definitions often serve group agendas while ignoring or attempting to silence others. And that's something that may come up in class with some of our readings or discussions. So we'll touch on that later. But the idea is that it can really be difficult to come to an understanding or agreement about an issue if we have different definitions for the things, the ideas or concepts that are at the heart of the issue. So as an example, take one of the most hotly debated issues in American life today, and for as long as I've been alive, involves a question of definition. Is a human fetus a human being? Well, that depends on how we're going to define human being, but if I answer yes, then I also am going to have to deal with a second issue of definition, and that's going to be, is abortion murder? Well, how are we defining murder? If murder is killing a human being, and a human fetus is a human being, then my definitions lead me to that conclusion. So, how we define things is, as you can see, issues of definition have far-reaching consequences. So, and even decades of debate can still leave the matter unresolved. Another example is the debate over the legal recognition of same-sex marriages. So take a moment and consider what definition-based or related question is at the heart of the issue. Another example of an argument of definition, take a look at how Bob Costas uses an important definitional distinction when he eulogizes Mickey Mantle, who was a famous New York Yankee who was also well known for having many human faults. So he writes, in the last year, Mickey Mantle, always so hard upon himself, finally came to accept and appreciate the distinction between a role model and a hero. The first he often was not, the second he always will be. But arguments of definition can be less weighty than the ones I've already mentioned, those still pretty hotly contested. I remember getting in trouble with a cheerleader when I was in high school because we had different definitions of sport. So, is cheerleading a sport? Kind of depends on how I define what a sport is. What about playing video games? Is that a sport? I've heard that argument be made. Is Batman a tragic figure? Okay, I don't think that the future of civilization hinges on this question, but it's definitely debatable, but it depends on how I define tragic figure. Is Trump a conservative? Is Hillary Clinton a criminal? Okay, these are questions that I've heard asked recently or suggested or implied. So part of it depends on, well, what's the definition of a conservative, or what's the definition of criminal? But if you listen closely, you'll hear that a lot of the arguments, whether they're friendly arguments or heated ones, that people are having around you are really arguments of definition. They're not seeing eye to eye, partly at least because they have different definitions for the same word or concept. Another claim that I've heard, Kobe Bryant is the greatest basketball player ever. Well, here are some responses. First of all, the answer is Michael Jordan. Second, that hinges on the definition of great. What if we have different definitions of what makes a great basketball player? Then that conversation is not probably going to go very well or be very productive. So we have different criteria based on the definitions being different. So one thing to try to remember to do, whether you are writing or just having conversations, is to avoid assuming that your definitions are universally accepted. All right, the next stasis question is, what is the quality or cause of the thing? So arguments that answer questions, or that answer this question, are called arguments of evaluation. So here's how arguments of evaluation work. They present criteria, and then they measure individual people, ideas, or things against those standards. They rely on judgments and appraisals, often regarding quality or performance. So when you see a car commercial that says these 3 cars were rated the best in class in safety for this last year, what you're hearing is an evaluative argument. Excuse me. So evaluative arguments take place quite a bit. I like this shirt better than that one. I like, this food more than that. This movie wasn't as good as that one. But things like awards shows, beauty pageants, best or worst dressed celebs. That's right, celebs. Literary prizes, political opinion polls, elections even can be seen as arguments of evaluation. You may have noticed that it can be a little tricky to sort of tell the difference or distinguish between arguments of definition and arguments of evaluation. And they are closely connected. So I'm going to try to explain the connection right here. So let's say I have a claim that Bob Schmertz will make the best mayor. Go Bob. Vote for Bob. To make this argument clear and effective, I will need to define just what it is, I think at least, a mayor is or should be. So once I've defined that, the definition I come up with is going to constitute the criteria that I use to evaluate Mr. Bob Schmertz and any of the other candidates who happen to be running for mayor. So the argument of definition would have taken place during maybe conversations that I had with other people in town when we were having conversations and maybe trying to work out just what it is a mayor is or should be. So when we were discussing what it is we were looking for in a mayor, that was when we were having our argument of definition. So let's say we came to a conclusion that we agreed on as far as what a good mayor would look like. Okay. Then when we took a look at Mr. Bob Schmertz and put him up against those standards and deciding, well, Mr. Bob Schmertz, he fits this criterion, but he doesn't fit another one. That's when we're having our argument of evaluation. All right, the last of the stasis questions, what actions should be taken? Okay, so arguments that answer this question are called proposal arguments. Proposal arguments attempt to present an issue or problem so clearly, so vividly that the audience basically says, what can we do? So take, for example, a topic of college tuition. So let's say that you're interested in studying college tuition. And so in developing an argument about rising tuition at your college, you might use all the prior stasis questions, so the first three, to study the issue and establish how much and for what reasons tuition is increasing. But the final question, what actions should be taken, will be the most important since it will lead you to develop proposals for action. Other questions to consider would be what actions can be taken, as in possible. What actions are possible to be taken. Also, how likely is it that those actions will lead to a desired outcome? Okay, so consider the debates over gun ownership in the U.S. Proposal arguments are made, it seems like almost all the time, by politicians and private citizens about quote-unquote what should be done to help eliminate or reduce a perceived problem of increasing gun violence. Most people don't actively argue for, at least I don't know anyone who actively argues for an increase in violence in general or in gun violence in particular. So why is there so much disagreement? Could part of the disagreement stem from the facts involved with the issue? Maybe there are facts you don't know about or that I don't know about. Could some of it have to do with having different definitions or criteria for what we think will be effective measures? And when I say effective, well, what do I mean by effective anyway? When a proponent of quote-unquote more stringent gun control measures calls their proposals common sense reforms, what exactly do they mean by more stringent? And how are we defining common sense? So you can see how things get pretty muddled. Personally, I don't think that jumping right to the proposal argument tends to be the right answer, because proposal arguments are sort of the end result of having asked a lot of other questions first. Quick review. On top of being able to classify arguments by their purposes and occasions, a third method of classifying arguments is by determining the core question it answers.